Welcome to Principal. Principal is a good tool for triggered animations and direct manipulation. So Principal has three building blocks. It has artboards, and it has layers, and it also has transitions, which you can create like this. The transitions move the layers. The layers have names. The transition uses the layer name to know what the layer should do when transitioning from one artboard to another. If the names do not match, the transition will not work. Instead of having an animation here, it just cuts from one artboard to another. We can do this in InVision, and if this is all we need to do, we might do it in InVision. So on artboard 1, I have a layer named box, and on artboard 2, I have a layer named box, and it animates from one box to another. This red box over here in the corner, because it has a different name, is not animated to. By changing the layer names, I can change what the animation does. Notice that the layer that doesn't have a buddy just pops on. But I can always add a buddy later. By default, everything moves at once and the transitions have a set time. We can modify this. If we click on the transition, the timeline should open up, or we can click this little guy up here. So the timeline basically has keyframes. This is the beginning of the transition, and here's the end. We can sequence these by just grabbing the blue bar. Oftentimes it's handy just to offset these a little bit to create a little bit of overlapping motion. This might be more apparent if they went the same way. Oh. If we create a transition going the opposite direction, this becomes the beginning of the animation, and that's the end. Notice as I select the transitions, the timeline is different. So I mentioned that one of the primary building blocks is a layer. There's a number of ways to create layers. The first way is really simple. You can create them in InVision. Or I'm sorry, not InVision, but you can create them in Principal. You've probably already done this. You can also create text layers. These guys are mostly the same. The exception is that a default layer has a background fill and also a stroke. The text layer, the background fill becomes the, how do I say this? The type color. If you would like to be technical about it, what Principal is doing is, I'm going to guess here, is that it's using the outlines of the type as kind of a mask for the background color. So in each case, you can kind of consider this as being kind of a background color. We can also get images in Principal by just dragging them in. This creates a new layer with an image fill property. And we can create transitions just like we did with the default boxes. One thing to keep in mind is that while we can animate all of the properties in here, some of these properties do not change over time. For example, the image property can change, but it won't gradually change from one image to another. So if I go over here and select this layer and drag a new image, the image is different, but the animation will not be gradual. Notice that it snaps between the two images. You might be able to see that better if we slow things down. The change happens right at the beginning. This can be an issue if you've accidentally messed up your layer names. So I'm going to have this guy called circle. And over here, maybe I'll have some other piece for one reason or another called circle. Oh, this will be even more likely. How about we'll call this menu button. And then over here, we'll also call it menu button. If you're not careful what you name your layers, you might get some unexpected results. This is not what we want. So when building your prototypes, make sure that you're naming your layers the same that you want to animate from one to another. One way of being careful about this is to build a composition and then just duplicate the artboard. That guarantees that the layers will all be in the same place with the same names. After this point, you can modify them as desired. Another way to do this is simply to create a composition, copy the elements that you like or that you want to keep, and then just paste them into another one. That's the basics of Principle: importing images, creating transitions, using the layer names.